The air was sharp with frost, the kind that bites the lungs and lingers on the skin. At 5:30 a.m., the world beyond Antonov Airport in Hostomel was still cloaked in the grey hush of dawn, the horizon a faint bruise against the dark. A single flare arced into the sky, its red glow slicing through the mist, casting jagged shadows across the runway. The silence broke with a low, guttural hum, a swarm of helicopters, their blades slicing the air like a heartbeat. Vitaly Rudenko, a commander in Ukraine's National Guard, froze, his breath catching as the sound grew louder, closer, a storm descending. His radio crackled, a voice urgent but steady. "They're coming! Be ready!" His heart thudded, not with fear, but with a clarity that sharpened every sense. The cold steel of his rifle, the crunch of gravel under his boots, the faint tremor in his hands. The camera zooms in on Vitaly's face, his eyes narrowed, reflecting the flare's fleeting light. His men, scattered across the airfield, crouched behind concrete barriers, their silhouettes blending with the skeletal remains of hangars. The Antonov An-125 Maria, the world's largest plane, loomed in its hangar, a silent giant unaware of the chaos about to unfold. A young soldier, Andriy, clutched a seashell from his Black Sea hometown, his fingers tracing its curves as if it could anchor him to a safer world. Beside him, Alexander, the unit's sharpshooter, adjusted his scope, his breath steady despite the weight of the moment. The air vibrated with the approaching helicopters, their shadows now visible, dark shapes weaving through the mist like specters. Vitaly's mind flashed to the night before, a fleeting moment of calm. His unit had gathered around a small fire, the crackle of burning wood mingling with quiet laughter. They'd shared stories of home, Andriy's dreams of fishing with his father, Alexander's memories of Kyiv's golden domes under summer skies. Vitaly had held a letter from his daughter, her childish scrawl promising to bake him bread when he returned. That memory felt like a lifetime ago, a fragile thread connecting him to a world beyond the runway. Now, the flare's light faded, and the hum became a roar, the ground trembling as the first rocket struck, showering sparks across the tarmac. The battle for Hostomel had begun. The camera pulls back, revealing the vastness of the airfield, its edges swallowed by mist. The helicopters descended, their lights blinking like eyes in the dark, and Vitaly's voice cut through the chaos, calm but unyielding. "Hold the line." The men braced, their faces a mix of resolve and quiet fear, their hands steady on their weapons. Andriy whispered a prayer, the seashell pressed to his chest. Alexander's scope glinted, tracking a target through the haze. The scene is electric, every sound amplified, the clatter of gear, the distant shouts, the roar of engines overhead. This was their stand, their moment. A handful of men against a storm, their hearts beating for home, for each other, for the city just beyond the horizon. The narrative shifts, pulling back to the hours before, when the world was still quiet, when Vitaly and his men prepared for a war they hoped would never come. The camera lingers on the airfield's stillness, the frost glistening on the runway, the Muria's silhouette a monument to a peaceful past. The men's faces, lit by the fire's glow, carry the weight of anticipation, their laughter a fragile defiance against the dawn that awaited them. What does it mean to stand against the storm, to hold a line when the world trembles? Their story begins here, in the whispers of the dawn, a tale of courage written in the heart of Hostomel, the shadow of Kyiv. The dawn of February 24th, 2022, broke over Hostomel with a chill that seeped into the bones, the air sharp with frost and the promise of upheaval. Antonov Airport, a sprawling complex just 10 kilometers northwest of Kyiv, stood as a vital artery for Ukraine's capital, its runways and hangars a gateway to the world. The Antonov On-225 Muria, the largest cargo plane ever built, rested in its hangar, a symbol of national pride now dwarfed by the weight of an approaching storm. The flat, open terrain of Hostomel offered little natural cover, its fields stretching toward the horizon, bordered by sparse woods and the distant glow of Kyiv's skyline. The airport's concrete runways and low buildings were exposed, a stark stage for the battle that would unfold. The conflict at Hostomel began with the first light of that winter morning, as the Russia-Ukraine war erupted in a cascade of sound and motion. A small contingent of Ukraine's National Guard, numbering perhaps a few hundred, held the airport, their equipment a patchwork of rifles, machine guns, and limited anti-aircraft defenses. They faced a formidable challenge, waves of helicopters carrying paratroopers supported by heavy armor and relentless barrages, aiming to secure the airfield as a bridgehead to Kyiv. The defenders' task was clear but daunting: hold the runways, disrupt the advance, and protect the capital at all costs. Their numbers were modest, their supplies finite, but their resolve was rooted in the city they called home. The geography of Hostomel shaped the struggle. The airport's open layout was both a strength and a vulnerability, offering clear lines of sight but little protection against aerial assaults. The surrounding fields, dusted with early snow, were soft with mud, slowing ground movements, but exposing anyone who crossed them. To the east, the Irpin River wound like a silver thread, its banks offering potential cover, but also a barrier to retreat. The weather added its own challenge. Temperatures hovered near freezing, the air thick with mist that clung to the ground, obscuring vision and amplifying the roar of approaching aircraft. The wind carried the scent of diesel and frost, a reminder of the fragility of this moment. Beyond the airfield, the world held its breath. News of the conflict's escalation flickered across global screens, Kyiv's fate a topic of urgent debate. Supplies to Hostomel were cut off, communication lines strained, and the defenders relied on radios and runners to coordinate their efforts. The international stage buzzed with concern, but for the soldiers on the ground, such matters were distant. Their reality was the runway, the hangars, the cold grip of their rifles, and the knowledge that Kyiv lay just beyond the horizon, its golden domes a beacon they fought to protect. The National Guard unit was a mix of seasoned fighters and young volunteers. Their training varied, but their purpose unified. Vitaly Rudenko, their commander, was a Kyiv native whose calm demeanor belied the chaos around him. His men, including Andriy, a fisherman's son from the Black Sea coast, and Alexander, a sharpshooter with a poet's heart, were bound by a shared love for their homeland. They carried photographs, letters and small tokens, a seashell, a cross, a child's drawing, reminders of lives left behind. Their equipment was basic, their ammunition limited, but they used the airport's layout to their advantage, turning hangars into strong points and runways into choke points. The broader context of the war loomed large. The conflict's opening hours were chaotic, with reports of fighting across Ukraine's borders filtering through fractured communications. Hostomel was a linchpin, its capture a potential gateway to Kyiv's heart. The defenders knew their stand could shift the tide, buying time for the capital to prepare. Yet they also knew the odds, outnumbered, outgunned, facing an opponent with superior air support. The weight of this knowledge pressed on them, but so did their resolve, forged in the quiet moments before dawn, when they'd shared stories of home and promises to return. The camera sweeps across the airfield, lingering on the frost-glazed runway, the Muria's hangar looming like a cathedral in the mist. The distant hum of helicopters grows louder, their shadows flickering through the haze. The soldiers' faces, illuminated by the faint glow of a flare, are a study in determination. Vitali's steady gaze, Andri's clenched jaw, Alexander's quiet focus. The wind stirs the snow, carrying the faint sound of church bells from Kyiv, a reminder of what they fight for. This is Hostomel, a place where the world's eyes converge, where a handful of men stand against a storm, their hearts beating for the city in the shadow of their sacrifice. Keepers of the line. The frost-covered runway of Antonov Airport stretched into the mist, its edges blurred by the dawn's faint light. In the shadow of the massive hangar housing the Antonov An-225 Mriya, Vitaly Rudenko knelt beside a concrete barrier, his radio silent, but his eyes alive with purpose. At 34, Vitaly was a commander in Ukraine's National Guard, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of leadership and the memory of Kyiv's bustling streets. Born in the capital, he'd grown up under the golden domes of St. Sophia's Cathedral, dreaming of a life as a historian, piecing together stories of his nation's past. But the war had reshaped his path, pulling him to Hostomel to defend the city he loved. His daughter's letter, tucked inside his jacket, was a quiet anchor. Her words, "Come home soon, Papa," a promise he carried through the chaos. Vitaly's inner world was a tapestry of duty and longing. He feared not for himself, but for the men he led, for the family waiting in Kyiv, for the history he might never write. Each decision weighed heavily, his calm exterior masking the storm of responsibility within. He remembered teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle, her laughter echoing through a park now shadowed by war. That memory fueled him, a reminder of why he stood on this frozen runway, why he could not falter. His men saw him as a rock, but in quiet moments his fingers brushed the letter, his heart whispering her name. Beside him was Andri, a 22-year-old volunteer from a fishing village on the Black Sea coast. His hands, rough from years of hauling nets, now gripped a rifle, the weight unfamiliar but steady. Andri had joined the National Guard after seeing his village's harbour silenced by distant fighting, his dreams of sailing with his father replaced by a resolve to protect his home. He carried a seashell in his pocket, its smooth curves a relic of the sea's embrace, a reminder of his mother's songs and his father's weathered smile. Andri's fear was quiet but persistent, a worry that he might never see the waves again, that his courage would not be enough. Yet his quick grin and soft-spoken humour lifted the men around him, a light in the cold dawn. Alexander, the unit's sharpshooter, was a study in contrasts. At 28, he was a poet at heart, his notebook filled with verses about Kyiv's rivers and skies. His hometown, a small suburb outside the capital, was where he'd first learned to shoot, his precision honed in quiet fields. Alexander had enlisted not out of obligation, but a deep love for the land that inspired his words, its beauty now at risk. His inner world was a blend of calm and storm, calm in the focus of his scope, storm in the fear that his poetry might remain unfinished. He carried a small cross necklace, a gift from his grandmother, its weight a reminder of her prayers, of the home he fought to return to. The three men were bound by more than their mission. In the hours before the battle, they'd shared a fire, their stories weaving a fragile bond. Vitaly spoke of his daughter's drawings, her crayons capturing a world of color he longed to see again. Andri described the sea's rhythm, its waves a lullaby he hummed in the dark. Alexander recited a line from his notebook, a verse about dawn breaking over Kyiv, his voice soft but steady. These moments were their strength, a reminder that they were not just soldiers, but sons, fathers, dreamers, their hearts tied to the city just beyond the horizon. Their bond was palpable, a quiet trust forged in shared glances and small gestures. Vitali's steady hand on Andri's shoulder steadied the younger man's nerves. Andri's jokes, even now, drew a rare smile from Alexander, whose focus softened in the warmth of their camaraderie. They were keepers of the line, not just of the runway, but of each other's hopes, their fears a shared burden, their resolve a collective fire. Vitali led with a historian's clarity, Andri with a fisherman's heart, Alexander with a poet's soul, each man a thread in the fabric of their stand. In the bunker-like hangar where they'd prepared, they'd shared what little they had. A sip of water, a piece of bread, a cigarette's fleeting warmth. Andri showed Vitali the seashell, its surface worn from constant touch, a promise to see the sea again. Alexander offered a verse, scribbled on a scrap of paper, its words a quiet defiance against the war's weight. Vitali listened, his silence a gift, his presence a reminder that they fought for more than ground, for Kyiv, for home, for the lives they carried within. As the helicopter's hum grew louder, their inner worlds collided with the reality of Hostomel. Vitali's fear of failing his men sharpened his focus, each order a step toward protecting Kyiv. Andri's longing for the sea drove him to stand firm, his hands steady despite the cold. Alexander's poetry became a lens, each moment a line in an unwritten verse, his scope a tool to preserve the beauty he loved. They were ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances, their hearts a map of courage and memory, their bond a light against the dawn's shadow. The camera lingers on Vitali's face, his eyes tracing the runway's frost, the letter in his jacket a silent vow. Andri clutches his seashell, his grin fading but his resolve firm. Alexander adjusts his scope, his cross necklace glinting in the dim light. They are ready, their hearts beating in unison. Keepers of a line that holds not just a runway, but a city, a home, a future. The mist swirls, the flare's glow fades, and the sound of helicopters grows, a storm they will face together. Across the frozen runway, the frost on Antonov Airport's runway glistened under the faint light of dawn, a brittle sheen that crunched beneath the boots of Vitali Rudenko and his men. It was February 24th, 2022, and the air at Hostomel, just 10 kilometers from Kyiv, was sharp with cold, the mist swirling like a living thing across the open fields. The hum of helicopters lingered in the distance, a low, menacing pulse that grew louder with each passing minute. Vitali led his small unit of National Guard soldiers through the shadows of the airfield, their silhouettes weaving between concrete barriers and the skeletal remains of hangars. The Antonov An-225 Muria loomed in its hangar, its massive form a silent witness to the storm about to break. The mission was clear but heavy: secure the northern runway and disrupt any attempt to land troops, buying time for Kyiv to prepare its defenses. Vitali's orders were precise, his voice steady, as he briefed his men in the pre-dawn hours. They were to move to a series of fortified positions along the runway's edge, using the hangars and scattered debris as cover. The task was daunting. Their numbers were small, their equipment limited to rifles, a few machine guns, and a handful of anti-aircraft weapons. Yet their resolve was unshaken, rooted in the city glowing faintly on the horizon, its golden domes a beacon they carried in their hearts. Vitali moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the mist for signs of movement. Beside him, Andri clutched his rifle, the seashell in his pocket, a quiet reminder of his Black Sea home. His steps were cautious, but firm, his fisherman's instincts adapting to the rhythm of this new terrain. Alexander, the sharpshooter, followed close behind, his scope slung over his shoulder, his poet's eyes catching the way the frost caught the light, a fleeting beauty amidst the tension. The air was alive with sounds, the distant roar of engines, the soft clatter of gear, the faint rustle of snow stirred by the wind. Their journey began in a cramped command post inside a hangar, its walls cold and pocked with rust. The men had gathered around a makeshift table, Vitali's map spread out, its edges curling in the damp air. He traced their route with a steady hand, marking positions along the runway where they could maximize cover. The plan relied on speed and surprise, using the airport's open layout to their advantage, turning every barrier into a stronghold. The men listened in silence, their faces lit by a single lantern, their breath visible in the chill. Andri's fingers brushed the seashell, Alexander's hand rested on his notebook, and Vitali's thoughts drifted to his daughter's letter, its words a quiet strength. As they moved out, the mist thickened, cloaking their advance but amplifying every sound. The runway stretched before them, a vast expanse of concrete and frost, its edges bordered by low grasses and scattered debris. The hangars loomed like ghosts, their windows dark, their roofs sagging under the weight of neglect. The men moved in a loose formation, their steps deliberate, their eyes scanning the horizon. The cold bit at their fingers, their breath clouding the air. But they pressed on, driven by a shared purpose that warmed their resolve. The terrain was unforgiving. The runway's open expanse offered no natural cover, forcing them to rely on man-made barriers, concrete blocks, rusted machinery, the remnants of cargo crates. At one point, they crossed a section of tarmac scarred by old repairs, the cracks filled with ice that threatened to trip them. Andri stumbled, his boot catching on a jagged edge, but Alexander's quick hand steadied him, a silent reassurance. Vitali paused to check his radio, its static a faint lifeline to other units scattered across the airfield. The signal was weak, the mist interfering, but he pressed on, his instincts honed by years in Kyiv streets. The sound of helicopters grew louder, their blades slicing through the air like a relentless drumbeat. Vitali signaled for the group to take cover behind a low wall, once part of a maintenance shed, now a fragile shield. The men crouched, their rifles ready, their breaths shallow. Andri hummed a soft tune, a fisherman's song from his village, its melody a thread of calm in the tension. Alexander adjusted his scope, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the mist, his poet's heart finding rhythm in the moment. Vitali's gaze was fixed on the northern horizon, where the first shapes of helicopters began to emerge, their lights blinking like stars through the haze. A moment of stillness came, unexpected and fleeting. The mist parted briefly, revealing a sliver of dawn light that painted the runway in shades of silver and blue. Alexander whispered a line from his poetry. "The dawn holds its breath, waiting for us," his voice barely audible but resonant. Andri grinned, his seashell pressed against his palm, and murmured, "The sea waits for me too." Vitali said nothing, but his hand brushed the letter in his jacket, a quiet vow to his daughter. These moments were their defiance, a refusal to let the war strip them of their humanity. The final stretch to their positions was a dash across open ground, the runway's expanse stretching like a frozen sea. Vitali led, his movements swift but controlled, guiding the men to a series of concrete barriers near the northern edge. The mist offered some cover, but the risk was palpable, the air buzzing with the threat of what lay beyond. They reached their posts, each man settling into place, Vitali at the center, coordinating, Andri to the east, his rifle steady, Alexander to the west, his scope trained on the horizon. The runway lay before them, a battleground waiting to be claimed, its frost a mirror to their resolve. The camera lingers on the men's faces, their breath clouding in the cold, their eyes sharp with anticipation. The Muria's hangar looms in the background, its silhouette a monument to a world now distant. The helicopter's hum grows louder, the mist swirling as their shapes take form. Vitaly's hand rests on his radio, Andrii's fingers trace the seashell, Alexander's scope glints in the dawn. They are ready, their hearts beating for Kyiv, for each other, for the line they've sworn to hold. The runway stretches before them, a frozen path to a battle that will test their courage, their bond, their humanity. The battle begins, flares in the mist. The mist over Antonov Airport thickened as dawn broke on February 24th, 2022, cloaking the runway in a ghostly veil that shimmered with frost. The northern edge of Hostomel's airfield was a fragile line where concrete barriers and rusted machinery formed makeshift strongpoints for Vitaly Rudenko and his small unit of Ukraine's National Guard. The hum of helicopters had grown into a deafening roar, their shapes now visible through the haze, dark silhouettes descending like predators. A flare arced into the sky, its red glow casting a harsh light across the tarmac, illuminating the faces of Vitaly, Andriy, and Alexander. Each man braced, their rifles steady, their hearts pounding with a clarity born of necessity. Vitaly crouched at the center, his radio crackling with faint reports from other units scattered across the airfield. His eyes scanned the horizon, catching the flicker of movement as paratroopers began to drop, their chutes blooming like pale flowers in the mist. The plan was simple but perilous. Hold the runway, disrupt the landing, and delay any advance toward Kyiv. The National Guard's numbers were small, their weapons limited, but their position leveraged the airport's layout, open ground that forced attackers to cross exposed terrain, with hangars and barriers offering cover for the defenders. Andriy, positioned to the east, gripped his rifle, his seashell tucked safely in his pocket, its weight a quiet reminder of his Black Sea home. His breath was shallow, his fisherman's hands steady despite the cold that numbed his fingers. Alexander, to the west, adjusted his scope, his poet's eyes narrowing as he tracked the first figures moving through the mist. The air was alive with sound, the thump of helicopter blades, the sharp crack of distant fire, the soft crunch of frost under shifting boots. Vitaly's voice cut through, calm but urgent. "Wait for my signal. Make every shot count." The battle began with a sudden jolt. A rocket struck a nearby hangar, sending a shower of sparks and debris across the runway. The men ducked, their bodies pressed against the barriers, the impact's tremor vibrating through the ground. Vitaly raised his binoculars, his gaze fixed on the advancing shapes, now closer, their movements coordinated, but cautious. He signaled for a controlled response, a burst of fire to deter rather than engage fully, preserving their dwindling ammunition. Andriy fired first, his shots kicking up dust on the tarmac, a warning to the shadows in the mist. Alexander followed, his sharpshooter's precision targeting the ground near the approaching figures, creating confusion without wasting rounds. The response was immediate, a flurry of return fire that pinged off the concrete, the sound sharp and metallic. The mist amplified the chaos, distorting distances, making every shadow a threat. Vitaly's radio sputtered, a garbled message warning of more helicopters circling to the south. The loss of clear communication was a blow, forcing the unit to rely on instinct and trust. Andriy's heart raced, his thoughts flashing to his father's fishing boat, the sea's steady rhythm a contrast to this storm. He fired again, his shots measured, his focus absolute. Alexander's scope tracked a figure moving too boldly, his finger steady on the trigger, his poet's heart finding rhythm in the moment. A twist came as the mist briefly parted, revealing the scale of the advance. Dozens of paratroopers, their silhouettes spreading across the runway, supported by the low rumble of armored vehicles approaching from the north. The defenders were outnumbered, their position exposed, and the weight of the odds pressed heavily. Vitaly's voice remained steady, directing the men to shift to secondary cover, a cluster of cargo crates closer to the hangar. The move was risky, requiring a sprint across open ground, but necessary to maintain their line. "Go now," he ordered, his tone a lifeline in the chaos. Andriy moved first, his boots slipping on the frost as he dashed to the crates, his rifle bouncing against his back. Alexander followed, his long strides precise, his scope slung over his shoulder. Vitaly covered them, his fire a steady rhythm to keep the shadows at bay. A projectile struck nearby, kicking up gravel, and Andriy stumbled, his hand clutching the seashell as he regained his footing. Alexander reached the crates, turning to signal Andriy, his cross necklace glinting in the flare's light. The moment was breathless, the mist closing in again, the air thick with the promise of danger. From their new position, the men could see the Maria's hangar, its massive form a silent sentinel in the chaos. The runway stretched before them, a frozen battlefield where every movement was a gamble. Vitaly adjusted their tactics, directing Andriy to focus on the eastern approach, while Alexander targeted the northern flank. The sharpshooters' shots were deliberate, each one a message to the advancing figures. This ground would not be easily taken. Andriy's fire was less precise, but relentless, his fisherman's strength pouring into each burst, his thoughts on the sea, on home. The battle's rhythm was relentless, a dance of sound and shadow. A helicopter roared low, its downdraft scattering debris, forcing the men to hunker down. The flare's light faded, replaced by the grey glow of dawn, revealing more figures moving through the mist. Vitaly's radio crackled once, a brief message confirming another unit's struggle near the southern hangars, then fell silent again. The isolation was palpable, but the men's bond held firm. Andriy caught Alexander's eye, offering a nod that spoke of trust, of shared purpose. Alexander returned it, his fingers brushing his cross, a silent prayer for strength. A moment of stillness came, unexpected and fleeting. The mist thickened, muffling the sounds of the advance, and the men caught their breath. Andriy pulled the seashell from his pocket, its curves a reminder of the waves he longed to see again. "For home," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Alexander murmured a line of poetry. "The dawn breaks, but we hold." His words a quiet defiance. Vitaly, ever watchful, touched the letter in his jacket, his daughter's words a beacon in the storm. These small acts were their rebellion, a refusal to let the war strip them of their humanity. The advance resumed, the shadows growing bolder, their movements faster. A heavier weapon roared, its impact shaking the crates, sending dust cascading over the men. Vitaly signaled for a tighter formation, his voice a steady anchor. "We hold here." The men adjusted, their rifles ready, their eyes scanning the mist. Andriy's hands trembled slightly, but his resolve was iron, his seashell a talisman against fear. Alexander's scope tracked a new target, his focus unbroken, his poet's heart finding meaning in the chaos. Vitaly's gaze was fixed on the runway, his mind racing through contingencies, his heart with his men. With Kyiv, the camera pulls back, revealing the runway's frozen expanse, the mist swirling like a living thing. The Maria's hangar looms, its silhouette a monument to a world at risk. The men's faces are lit by the flare's dying light, their breath clouding in the cold, their eyes sharp with purpose. The helicopter's roar grows louder, the shadows closer, but the defenders stand firm, their bond a light in the dark, their courage a testament to the city they protect. The battle for Hostomel is only beginning, but in this moment they are keepers of the line, their hearts beating for each other, for Kyiv, for home. The sacrifice, a runway's price. The mist over Antonov Airport clung to the runway like a shroud, its icy tendrils curling around the concrete barriers where Vitaly Rudenko and his unit held their ground. The dawn of February 24, 2022, had given way to a grey morning, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and the relentless roar of helicopters circling Hostomel. The northern runway was a battlefield, its frost-covered surface scarred by the first exchanges of fire. Vitaly crouched behind a stack of cargo crates, his radio silent, his eyes scanning the haze for the advancing shadows of paratroopers. Beside him, Andrei clutched his rifle, his seashell a quiet anchor in his pocket, while Alexander adjusted his scope, his poet's heart steady despite the chaos. The battle had intensified, the initial skirmish escalating into a relentless push. The defenders' position was precarious, their small numbers stretched thin across the runway's edge, their ammunition dwindling with each burst. The helicopters had landed troops to the north, their shapes now spreading across the tarmac, moving with purpose through the mist. Vitaly's voice was a steady thread in the storm, directing his men to hold their fire, to wait for clear targets, to make every shot count. The runway was their line, a fragile barrier between the attackers and Kyiv, and they knew the cost of yielding it. The turning point came with a low, ominous rumble. A heavier vehicle, its tracks grinding against the rubble beyond the runway. Vitaly's binoculars caught the glint of metal, a transport moving to reinforce the paratroopers, its presence a threat that could overwhelm their defenses. The men exchanged glances, their faces etched with the weight of the moment. The radio, their only link to other units, remained dead, leaving them isolated, a lone outpost in the vastness of Hostomel. Andrei's breath hitched, his thoughts flashing to his father's fishing boat, the sea's calm a distant dream. Alexander's fingers brushed his cross necklace, his focus unbroken, but his heart heavy with the odds. "We can't let them secure the runway," Vitaly said, his voice calm but urgent. "If they do, Kyiv's open." The words hung in the air, a truth that sharpened their resolve. The transport was the key. If they could disable it, they could slow the advance, giving other units time to regroup. But the task was daunting. The vehicle was moving beyond a cluster of fuel drums near the hangar, a relic of the airport's operations, now a potential weapon. A controlled explosion could disrupt the advance, creating chaos and a barrier of fire, but it meant crossing open ground, exposed to the enemy's fire. "I'll go," Alexander said, his voice steady, his sharpshooters calm, masking the storm within. Vitaly's eyes met his, searching for doubt, but found only resolve. Andrei protested, his hand tightening on his rifle. "You're our best shot, Alexander. Let me—" Vitaly cut him off, his hand raised, his gaze locked on Alexander. "You're sure?" he asked, his tone soft but weighted. Alexander nodded, his cross necklace glinting in the dim light. "For Kyiv," he said simply, his poet's heart finding purpose in the act. Vitaly handed him a small explosive charge, scavenged from their limited supplies, and outlined the plan with precision. Alexander would move low, using the mist and debris for cover, to place the charge on the fuel drums. Vitaly and Andrei would provide covering fire, drawing attention away from his path. The moment came swiftly. Vitaly signaled, and Andrei unleashed a burst of fire toward the advancing shadows, the sound sharp against the mist's hush. Alexander moved, his body low, his steps deliberate, as he darted across the runway, the frost crunching underfoot. The air was alive with danger, the buzz of a drone overhead, the crack of return fire, the distant roar of the transport. Alexander's heart pounded, but his focus was absolute. His poet's eyes fixed on the fuel drums, their rusted surfaces a beacon in the chaos. He thought of his notebook, its pages filled with verses of Kyiv's rivers, and the promise to finish them one day. Halfway to the drums, A projectile struck nearby, kicking up gravel and dust. Alexander stumbled, his shoulder grazing a jagged piece of metal, pain flaring but not stopping him. He pressed on, his hand steady as he reached the drums and secured the charge, its soft beep a countdown to disruption. The mist offered some cover, but a flare's red glow lit the sky, casting his silhouette in sharp relief. A sharp crack split the air, and Alexander flinched, a graze searing his leg, but he held his ground, his fingers working quickly to arm the device. Vitali's covering fire roared, a desperate rhythm to shield him, and Andri's shots joined in, their bond a lifeline across the tarmac. Alexander activated the charge and turned to run, his leg burning but his resolve unbroken. The sprint back was a blur, his boots slipping on the frost, his breath ragged as he wove through debris. Andri reached out, pulling him behind the crates just as the drums erupted, a roar of fire and smoke billowing into the sky. The blast shook the runway, the heat washing over them, the air thick with the scent of burning fuel. The transport halted, its path blocked by the inferno, the paratroopers scattering in confusion. The defenders had their moment, a precious pause in the storm. Andri was at Alexander's side in an instant, his hands quick but gentle as he checked the wound, his fisherman's strength now a healer's care. "You're a mad man," he said, his voice thick with relief, a grin breaking through his worry. Alexander managed a weak smile, his hand clutching his cross, the pain secondary to the knowledge that he'd bought them time. Vitali clapped his shoulder, his eyes conveying a gratitude words couldn't capture. "You did it," he said simply, but the weight of those words carried the strength of their bond. The explosion had shifted the battle's momentum, but the cost was clear. The runway was more exposed now, the crates weakened by the blast's shockwave. The mist began to thin, revealing the silhouettes of regrouping paratroopers, their advance slowed but relentless. Vitali's face was grim as he surveyed the horizon, the knowledge that they couldn't hold forever settling like dust. Yet, in that moment, Alexander felt a quiet pride, not for the act itself, but for the men beside him, for the choice they'd made together. The camera lingers on Alexander's face, his breath steadying, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. Andri binds his wound, his hand steady, a fisherman's care in every movement. Vitali stands watch, his silhouette a pillar against the chaos, his mind already turning to the next step. The explosion's echo fades, but its impact lingers, a testament to their resolve, a sacrifice made not for glory but for each other, for the hope of holding Hostomel a little longer. The runway stretches before them, a frozen battlefield scarred by their stand, their hearts beating as one. Aftermath echoes on the tarmac. The runway of Antonov Airport lay silent under a thinning veil of mist, the frost now scarred by the black streaks of the fuel drum explosion. The air was heavy with the acrid tang of smoke. The flames' glow fading into a dull orange against the grey dawn of February 24th, 2022. The skeletal hangars of Hostomel stood as mute witnesses, their shadows stretching across the tarmac, a battlefield marked by the courage of a small National Guard unit. Vitali Rudenko crouched behind a crumbling cargo crate, his eyes scanning the horizon where the silhouettes of paratroopers had retreated, their advance stalled by Alexander's sacrifice. Andri knelt beside Alexander, his hand still securing the bandage on his comrade's leg, while the sharpshooter leaned against the crate, his breath shallow but steady, his cross necklace glinting faintly in the dim light. The explosion had bought them time, a fragile pause in the storm that had engulfed Hostomel. The transport vehicle, caught in the blast's chaos, was a smouldering wreck, its path blocked by debris and fire. The paratroopers had scattered, their formation disrupted, giving the defenders a moment to breathe. but the cost was etched in the silence that followed. The runway was more exposed, their ammunition nearly spent, and the radio remained dead, a silent reminder of their isolation. The Muria's hangar loomed in the distance. The Antonov An-225, untouched but vulnerable, a symbol of a nation now fighting for its heart. Vitaly's gaze lingered on the horizon, his mind racing through the next steps. The runway could not be held indefinitely, not with their numbers so few and their supplies so low. The decision to fall back weighed heavily, a retreat not of defeat, but of necessity, to preserve what strength they had for the fight ahead. He turned to his men, his voice calm but heavy. "We move to the secondary line, near the hangar. We hold there." The words were practical, but beneath them lay a deeper truth. Each moment they held, Hostomel, was a moment Kyiv gained to prepare. Andriy helped Alexander to his feet, the sharpshooter's legs stiff but functional, his resolve unbroken. "You're heavier than you look," Andriy teased, his grin a flicker of light in the gloom. Alexander managed a weak chuckle, his hand clutching his cross, the pain a distant second to the bond that held them together. Vitaly led the way, his steps deliberate, guiding them through the maze of debris toward the hangar's shadow. The tarmac crunched underfoot, the frost mingling with ash, each step a testament to their survival. The withdrawal was cautious, the mist offering some cover, but not enough to ease their tension. The air was colder now, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant engines, a reminder that the pause was temporary. The men moved in silence, their rifles ready, their eyes scanning the haze. Andriy's seashell pressed against his thigh, a quiet vow to see the Black Sea again. Alexander's notebook, tucked in his jacket, held verses unwritten, a promise to finish them for Kyiv. Vitaly's hand brushed the letter from his daughter, its words a beacon through the dark. They reached a fortified position near the hangar, a cluster of concrete pillars and steel beams that offered better cover. Other soldiers waited there, their faces drawn, their eyes reflecting the same mix of exhaustion and resolve. The hangar loomed above, its massive doors ajar, the Maria's silhouette a ghostly presence within. The men settled into place, their breaths visible in the cold, their hands checking weapons with practiced care. Vitaly briefed the group, his voice steady, outlining a new defensive line to protect the hangar's approach. The runway was lost, but the fight was not, and they would hold here as long as they could. The aftermath was a study in contrasts, silence where there had been chaos, stillness where there had been motion. The explosion's echoes lingered, not in sound, but in the men's faces, in the way Andriy's hands trembled slightly as he passed a canteen to Alexander, in the way Alexander's eyes lingered on the horizon, his poet's heart searching for meaning in the ruin. Vitaly stood watch, his binoculars scanning the mist, his historian's mind cataloguing this moment, a chapter in Kyiv's story that would not be forgotten. In the quiet, they shared what little they had, a sip of water, a piece of bread, a cigarette's fleeting warmth. Andriy spoke of his village, of the sea's endless rhythm, his voice soft but steady. "When this is over, we'll fish together," he said, his eyes on Alexander, who nodded, his cross a silent promise. Vitaly listened, his silence a gift, his thoughts on his daughter's laughter, on the bread she'd promised to bake. These stories were their defiance, a refusal to let the war erase who they were, what they fought for. The tarmac bore the scars of their stand, blackened patches where the fuel drums had burned, scattered casings glinting in the frost, the air heavy with the weight of what had been lost and what had been gained. They had held the runway for hours, a small unit against a storm, and though the ground was no longer theirs, the time they'd bought was a gift to Kyiv. The cost was measured not in numbers, but in moments. The graze on Alexander's leg, the strain in Vitaly's eyes, the seashell Andriy clutched like a lifeline. The world beyond the hangar pressed closer, its presence felt in the faint rumble of engines, the distant buzz of drones. The men knew the fight was far from over, that the pause was a breath, not a reprieve. Yet, in this moment, they found strength in each other, in the quiet acts that defined them. Andriy offered Alexander a piece of bread, their hands brushing in a gesture of brotherhood. Alexander recited a line from his notebook, his voice a whisper. "The tarmac holds our echoes, our hearts, the dawn." Vitaly touched his daughter's letter, its words a vow to keep going, to hold the line for one more day. The camera pulls back, revealing the hangar's shadowed embrace. The Muria's silhouette a monument to a nation's spirit. The tarmac stretches beyond, its frost and ash a canvas of their stand, the mist swirling like a living thing. The men's faces are lit by the lantern's glow, their breath clouding in the cold, their eyes sharp with purpose. They are weary but unbroken, their bond a light against the darkness, their sacrifice a thread in the tapestry of Hostomel's defiance. The echoes on the tarmac linger, a testament to their courage, a whisper of the city they protect. Reflection, a promise to Kyiv. The hangar at Antonov Airport cast a long shadow over the frost-dusted tarmac, its cavernous interior a sanctuary of steel and silence. The mist of February 24, 2022, lingered outside, curling around the skeletal remains of Hostomel's runways, where the echoes of the day's battle still resonated. Inside, a single lantern flickered, its soft glow bathing the faces of Vitaly Rudenko, Andriy, and Alexander in a fragile warmth. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and smoke, the cold seeping through the concrete, but the men sat close, their presence a defiance against the war that pressed in from beyond. The Antonov An-25 Meria loomed behind them, its massive silhouette a silent guardian, a symbol of a nation's dreams now tethered to their stand. Vitaly leaned against a crate, his daughter's letter unfolded in his hands, its childish scrawl a lifeline to Kyiv. The battle for Hostomel had left its mark, Alexander's bandaged leg, Andriy's weary grin, the weight of their dwindling supplies. But it had not broken them. They had held the runway for hours, a small unit against a storm of helicopters and paratroopers, buying precious time for the capital just 10 kilometers away. The explosion Alexander triggered had slowed the advance, but the runway was no longer theirs, and the silence that followed was both a reprieve and a burden. Vitaly's eyes traced the letter's words. "Come home soon, Papa." And he felt the ache of a promise he longed to keep. Andriy sat cross-legged, his seashell turning in his hands, its smooth curves catching the lantern's light. The Black Sea was a distant dream, its waves a rhythm he carried in his heart. But here, in the hangar's dim embrace, he found a different kind of anchor. The men beside him, their shared resolve a tide that lifted them all. Alexander, his legs stiff but his spirit unbroken, held his notebook, its pages filled with verses of Kyiv's rivers and skies. He added a line in the flickering light, his poet's heart weaving the day's chaos into words. "The tarmac holds our breath, but Kyiv holds our dawn." The act was small but profound, a vow to keep writing, to keep dreaming, to keep fighting. The aftermath of Hostomel was not measured in ground, held or lost, but in the quiet moments that defined them. They had faced the storm, their rifles steady, their hearts unyielding, and though the runway was scarred and the Maria's hangar stood vulnerable, they had given Kyiv a chance to breathe. The cost was etched in their faces, Vitaly's furrowed brow, Andriy's trembling hands, Alexander's quiet focus. But so was their strength, a bond forged in the fire of their stand. They were not just soldiers, but keepers of a promise, their hearts tied to the city glowing faintly on the horizon, its golden domes a beacon through the mist. In the hangar's stillness, they shared what little they had. A sip of water, a crust of bread, a cigarette passed hand to hand. Andriy spoke of his village, of fishing with his father under a summer sun, his voice soft but steady. "When this is over, we'll sail together," he said, his eyes on Alexander, who nodded, his cross necklace a silent vow. Vitaly listened, his historian's mind capturing the moment, a chapter in a story he hoped to tell his daughter one day. These stories were their rebellion, a refusal to let the war erase who they were, what they fought for. The world outside was a murmur of distant engines, the faint buzz of drones, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The men knew the pause was temporary, that the storm would return. But in this moment, they chose to linger in the light of their bond. Vitaly folded his daughter's letter, tucking it close to his heart. Its words a promise to return to Kyiv, to bake bread with her, to walk its streets again. Andriy slipped the seashell into his pocket, its weight a vow to see the sea, to carry his comrades with him. Alexander closed his notebook, his verses a testament to the beauty they fought to preserve, a city worth every sacrifice. The silence of the hangar was not empty, but full, of loss, of hope, of the unspoken vows that held them together. They had stood against the storm, their courage a quiet flame that burned through the cold. Vitaly thought of his daughter's laughter, Andriy of the sea's endless rhythm, Alexander of the verses that would outlive this war. They were ordinary men, bound by extraordinary circumstances. Their stand at Hostomel, a letter to tomorrow, written in frost and fire, sealed with their resolve. The camera pulls back, revealing the hangar's vast interior, the Maria's silhouette a monument to a nation's spirit. The lantern's glow flickers, casting shadows that dance across the men's faces. Vitaly's steady gaze, Andriy's weary grin, Alexandra's quiet focus. The tarmac beyond is scarred, the mist swirling like a living thing. But within this moment, they are whole, their hearts beating for each other, for Kyiv, for home. Their stand was not for glory, but for the promise of a dawn they might not see, a city they fought to save. What does it mean to hold a line when the world trembles? To carry a city in your heart, to stand for those who wait beyond the horizon? The men of Hostomel leave us with these questions, their courage a whisper in the mist, their sacrifice a promise to Kyiv. Their story is one of humanity, of dreams that endure, of a bond that holds fast against the storm. Subscribe to Ukraine Frontline War Stories for more untold tales of the Ukraine War, where every soldier's heart tells a story of resilience. Share your thoughts below. What does it mean to you to fight for something greater than yourself? Let their promise inspire us all.